Hey everybody, I'm live. And if you're wondering what the echo is about, I actually have echo cancellation on, but because of whatever's going on with how the Brave browser is relating, for want of a better term, or interfacing, perhaps a better term, with StreamYard, what you're getting is my lousy imitation of me if I were a ghost. This is what I sound like if I were a ghost. Hi. All right. But I'm not here to talk about me as a ghost. I'm here to talk about this guy, Maxx Crosby. Yeah. And you would say, wait a minute, this is a late topic. No, actually, it's not late for me. Let's recap. Let me take you all the way back to 2025. Let me take you back to when it was quite apparent that the Pete Carroll coached Las Vegas Raiders were not going to make the playoffs, let alone have a sniff at the possibility of being in the Super Bowl. Let's go back to the time when still Raiders' legendary defensive end brought to the team in 2018, Maxx Crosby was playing lights out, even though with high energy, even though it was obvious the Raiders were not going anywhere. He was relentless. In fact, as you remember, as the season progressed, it became clear that there was the possibility that the Raiders would have the #1 pick in the 2026 NFL draft, right? So then there came talk that the Raiders would tank. Now, what's tanking? Tanking is deliberately losing games in the NFL parlance with the objective of having the worst record that year so that you get #1 pick for the NFL draft of the next year. That is the idea. In my long history with the Raiders, which goes back to 1974, I don't ever remember a Raiders team losing to get anything, tanking. I remember when the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Oakland Raiders from Oakland were ruling at least the AFC side of the NFL. And hold on a second. 1 second. I'm upstairs. Sorry, folks. Sorry, folks. I had a me. I thought they knew I was upstairs and let them know, so they don't think I've left the house or something. Hold on a second. Hey, stuff happens. What? I'm upstairs. Okay, what's going on? Okay, sorry about that. I'm back. Thanks for waiting. And sorry for weird echo. But anyway, what was going on is that yeah, my mic is messed up a little. I have to figure out what's going on there because it I'm using the Brave layout, and for some reason the audio. So I had echo. Can we turn up concentration? Let me try that. Is that better? No, no better. All right. So reduce mic background noise. That's not good. Maybe turn off mic volume like that. Nope, that doesn't really do anything. I've got two of these avatars open, and StreamYard automatically opened two of these, and it won't get rid of one. So that's why you hear two. Even when I start off the mic for it, it still acts as if there are two recordings going. That's what's going on. All right. Now, back to the other man. I'm caregiving for my mom, and she was sleeping, and I said, hey, I'm going to go upstairs and make this live stream. She forgot for me. When you're responsible for people, you have to stop what you're doing. It doesn't matter if they're little kids or grown adults, and see what's going on with them. That's your first priority. So that's a word to anybody out there who thinks, hey, I would stop. No, you should. Okay. You have your priorities in line as always. Family first. Always. Okay. Now, all that aside, let's talk about Maxx. All right. So the problem with the Raiders now, again, I say this: I have never known the Raiders to tank. Ever. And I remember in the 70s, actually specifically 1976, the claim by the Steelers was that they were afraid to face the Raiders in the playoffs. Oh, excuse me, let me turn that around. The claim by the Steelers was that the Raiders were afraid to face them in the playoffs, and that the Raiders would deliberately lose to, I think it was the Bengals, to avoid playing the Steelers. Well, no. The Raiders beat the Bengals. And longtime Raider fans like myself will tell you that given an opportunity to win, given an opportunity to dominate, those words are win, dominate, the Raiders will always take it. That's why the idea that the Las Vegas Raiders of last year would tank. Unheard of. No way. Wouldn't bet on it. And yet, Maxx was asked not to play. Maxx's claim was, hey, he's perfectly healthy. That there was nothing wrong with him. Okay. So then the claim was that Maxx wanted out of Oakland. He wanted to go to a winner. Now, my long criticism was not that long, because it hasn't been very long at all, of Raiders general manager John Spytek is he doesn't understand what I call Raiders DNA. Raiders DNA is best described as if you take the best characteristics of the champion Raider teams and specific players like the Mad Stork or Ted Hendricks, or Mr. Stickum, Lester Hayes, or number 87, the Ghost of the Post, the guy who ran my 401k, Dave Casper, or the fleet-footed Cliff Branch, or the other Mr. Sticky, Fred Biletnikoff. You look for their championship characteristics of the past in players you are considering drafting or signing in the present for the future. So what you get is a continuation of what we call Raiders DNA. And I'll tell you the person who taught me that. It was Lou Erber. Lou Erber was assistant coach for the Raiders. This is during the 70s. I met him on a plane in early 1977. And on a lot. I had no idea who he was. Yeah, I was a kid. Skyline High School. We're sitting next to each other, going back to the Bay Area. And long story short, he proceeds to tell me that he was scouting players for the Raiders, and his name was Lou Erber. He was assistant coach and scout. But the beauty of the conversation, he pulled out this book. Not like this. A thick binder book of players and photographs and charts and statistics. And what he pointed to was this picture section that consisted of greats like Phil Villapiano, Otis Sistrunk, and many others, okay? Ordered by position. Point is, when they were looking for a linebacker, remember, this is the days before the mountains of data we have today. Not that the Raiders didn't have a lot of data then, but they didn't have the computer systems. There wasn't the internet, nothing like that. Everything was written by hand, angels and devils on your shoulders, and if you know how to do math and calculations, it was that too. But they had photographs of the players that they wanted with a physical characteristics, which then would call for bringing up their psychological characteristics and behavioral characteristics that made those Raider players great. And that's what they were trying to replicate all the time. Bring that to the modern age. And I argue that it's still possible to look at players like that and still get the best player for the Raiders. And I argue further that people like Mike Mayock, general manager, don't get Raiders DNA, and yet he was the GM, and John Gruden and Mark Davis allowed him to be the GM. So what do we get out of Mike Mayock's first draft? We got Cleveland Farrell. Remember Cleveland Farrell? We got Cleveland Farrell when we should have had Devin White, the fleet-footed linebacker that the Bucs wound up getting and winning Super Bowls with. Okay? Devin White. And so, I should say Super Bowl with Devin White. Well, no, plural. He has two rings. Devin White. So, anyway, point is that if Mayock had followed Raider DNA, he could have looked at linebackers as about of speed and hitters and said, hey, Devin White reminds me of a cross between George Atkinson and, I would say, I was thinking of Rod Martin, linebacker. Rod Martin's fast hitter. Okay, you put him in the middle. You put him on the weak side linebacker, strong side linebacker. He was a playmaker hitter, but George Atkinson was the ultimate hitter. And it's difficult to avoid the claim that in his day, Devin White was a hit. So, and ironically, Devin eventually did wind up with the Raiders, right? As to whether or not we got the best version of this, I think, for discussion. But my point is, Raider DNA and the thinking about Raider DNA has, or lack thereof, has been, I contend, the reason why we haven't seen the Raiders win championships. And here comes a continuation of that problem in the idea of letting Maxx Crosby go, of doing the unthinkable. And no, we did it before. We did it with Khalil Mack. Letting Khalil Mack go is the dumbest thing any Raiders executive has ever done in the history of the silver and black. Sorry, John, you're my friend, but it's true. You know what? So do I. It was the dumbest move any Raiders executive has ever done in the history of the silver and black related to personnel. Finance and everything else is a different story. Although it's difficult to find bad moves in that case. But I digress. I'm not going to get to it. My point is, it wasn't even with consideration of Raider DNA then, when John did it, and it wasn't when John Spytek considered it. But here's where things get really screwy. Maxx said there's nothing wrong. I'm thinking, did John Spytek forget that Maxx Crosby, he claimed Maxx Crosby was injured and held him out? So why would you then turn around and offer him up as a trade candidate when you yourself said the man is hurt just a few months later? Does that make any sense? No. Okay? I mean, you can't. I thought maybe he did it because he thought, John talking about Spytek, because he thought that it would blow up. Maxx would get his wish and it will fall apart and he'll become a Raider all over again. Because the idea was that Maxx wanted out and they were trying to accommodate him. So there's one way to look at it. In other words, they structured the deal that they knew were going to blow up. But here's why that makes no sense. You're staring at 2 first-round picks. Okay? You're staring at 2 first-round picks. That's gold to any NFL team. 1 year after the other. The Raiders already have the number 1 pick. That's Fernando. But they had the second pick, 2 picks in the first round this year, and then the next year. All right? So next year, so basically they have 4 picks in the first round in 2 years. That's pretty good. That can form the cornerstone for a new Raiders organization on the field. But guess what? As you and I both know, it would all went. Okay. The Raiders had a great free agent haul, no question about it. But that draft was a difference maker. So I'm still left with, how the heck did we get there? And it still calls into question for me John Spytek's ability and his personnel department's ability to really make the call right when the call comes to personnel. Now you would say, well, Zinni, doesn't this free agency, isn't that a nice counterpoint? And my thought is the Raiders are getting a lot of solid players. They got arguably the best center in the NFL. So I would say that overall, yeah, it is a great response. I'm not going to take anything away from what was done in free agency because of this obvious error. I'm still, the unanswered question in my mind is why did that happen in the first place? Maybe it's because maybe they made decisions by committee and someone really thought, well, this is going to work for us. and the Ravens, maybe they were so excited about the picks that they didn't consider the possibility that Maxx would fail his physical. All right. Or maybe they did consider the possibility they got to the Ravens and the Ravens pulled a weird trick on them. Here's where things flip. Okay? Because, and then they flip in a way that do not make the organization of the Baltimore Ravens the same team that brought in Ozzie Newsome, the legendary Cleveland Browns tight end, as general manager, and Ozzie Newsome built the champion Raiders. Excuse me. Yeah, that was a great thing when he built the champion Ravens that everyone talks about today and will continue to talk about for the rest of our lives. That was Ozzie Newsome. That was Ozzie Newsome. Okay. All right. So I don't think I know Ozzie Newsome can do anything like what the Ravens are accused of doing. They bring a man in, and then maybe they check him out, right? Or maybe someone was so, maybe the Raiders, when the Ravens brass, the Ravens have a new group of people. Well, they do have Eric DeCosta. He's still the general manager, so let me hold off on that. Maybe Eric was so excited over the idea of reportedly having both Trey Hendrickson and Maxx Crosby that he overlooked something with respect to Maxx. Or maybe he thought Maxx was a different player than he turned out. Maxx is not your classic big, huge body defensive. He's for his size, he's lengthy. He's not, when you look at him, he's not physically imposing, but he is cat quick. He is cat quick. He's almost like, I was thinking of Montez Sweat, you know, Chicago Bears, who runs a 4.40-yard dash. Okay? Maxx isn't that fast, but he's fast. And you might see Maxx get struck once in a while, but he doesn't let it happen again in the same game. Maybe you caught him with bad footwork, something like that, but he always makes up for it. The guy is relentless. That's what you want. You want that motor. You also want that as an example of how you want your team to be. Again, Raiders, DE Got that? Raiders, DE Let that sing out to the mountains. That's what's important. And so you have a general manager that comes to any team and says, hey, what's the DNA of the team? What's the legacy? That person or persons, I guarantee you, will craft a champion for that team. So you're looking at the best characteristics that got them the Lombardi. You're looking at the best characteristics in the history of those teams that got those teams the Lombardi. If I'm thinking about, for example, the Dallas Cowboys, Jerry Jones said, I want you to be our general manager. I want a leader like Roger Staubach. We have that in Dak Prescott. No problem. He's right size, right arm, everything. Good reaction time. Does the basics of getting our people out of the huddle, lined up, and getting the play started, which may sound like a ridiculous consideration. But in the age where you have players that have grown up in what I call the apple and peach offense generation. What I mean by that is we have college offenses where they have signs. The apple means this and peach means that, right? As opposed to brown left, X opposite shift, toss 38, halfback lead, fullback pass to what? It's actually the halfback pass, the fullback pass that Robert Newhouse threw to Golden Richards in Super Bowl 12. Cowboys 27, Broncos 10. All right? So, point I'm making is you know the DNA of the team. You know what wins. Continuing that, you say, all right, tied in with Cowboys, Billy Joe Dupree. 6'4", 6'5", lanky, fleet-footed, basketball build, great at getting open, long arms to catch the ball. So you look at tight ends that have that characteristic and are even faster. Okay? Because that's what's one for the Cowboys. I'm not saying you ignore a tight end that has other characteristics that may be equally valuable. But I'm saying that you have a baseline to be able to evaluate players based on what the team did well that gave them the characteristics. And not only that, it also helps sell season tickets. Why? Because even to this day, season tickets, particularly on the East Coast in the NFL, are a generational thing. Some people, some families have season tickets that are gone back, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years in their history. Carriers drive for 50. So it means a lot to have a player that young person identifies with that reminds the father, certain player, and the grandfather too. That solidifies the connection that the team has with the fan in the NFL. And it makes it multi-generational. All right. So it's really important to think that way. If you don't, as far as I'm concerned, you miss what it means to build the heart of a team. And the Raiders almost bricked out the heart by putting themselves in a position to let Maxx go. Because when you do that, right? Think about my example with Mike Mayock. Just because you have 3 picks in the first round, and they did. It doesn't mean you're going to get the right players and keep them. Okay? All right? Okay? I give credit to John Gruden himself for getting Raiders DNA. Henry Ruggs, when I think of Henry Ruggs to this day, who I think hope comes back to the Raiders, there's a chance. I think of Cliff Branch. Speed kills. And when I say that, I think of the famous photograph with number 121 Cliff Branch catching a touchdown pass in the end zone Coliseum. And on this, I have to share a side comment of my condolences to the family of famed Oakland Tribune columnist and friend Dave Newhouse, who passed away 2 days ago. I'm having Andy Dolich on, who is a great friend, as well as a famed executive with the Warriors, the Memphis Grizzlies, San Francisco 49ers. And he's coming on Thursday at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern, to talk about Dave Newhouse and his contributions to the culture of sports. I look forward to that. And anyway, back to the comment. It was a mistake what was done there in terms of letting Maxx go. But now Maxx is there. They're not going to trade him. They're not interested, and that's good. But what the Raiders have to do as further apology for what they almost did to Maxx is devote this draft to building Raiders DNA. Free agent was about getting the best player available who played in the NFL, different positions. I get that. But the draft should be about not just that, but asking collectively ourselves, what's missing in the heart of our team? We want hitters. We want speedsters. We want guys who play with a nasty streak. Of course, you have to know how to turn it off so you don't get too penalized. But hey, having a lot of penalties has been an okay deal in Raider lore. Just saying. Just saying. But I believe if my model of determining who the best players are is used out there, and we'll do this. Do I think Fernando fits the bill? Yes. I think Fernando is an interesting combination of Jim Plunkett and Ken Stabler. He has Plunkett's aplomb at execution of the technical passes. But it's matched with Ken Stabler's will to win. All right? No, he's not the guy that's about carousing in the way that they did then, but he is not above a good party, Fernando. He likes being a man of the people. Okay? So that part is uniquely him, but it's also as much Ken Stabler if you ever had the pleasure of meeting Ken, and I did. Ken Stabler was the person you wanted to know. He was a cool guy. He made you feel like you were his friend and a regular guy. And he didn't say much, just the way he was. He would be out the value of Joe Scomas down there, Jack Lemmon Square, which no longer exists. And he and Otis Sistrunk and the late Gene Upshaw, who I had the pleasure of meeting at, well, I met him before, okay? But meeting him outside in person at the 2004 Super Bowl with Rachel walking along. Anyway, players in history are what mark the NFL. But there's some people in the NFL who don't know their history and don't know the DNA of the teams that they represent. And I contend that's why the Raiders have not won in a long time. And I can say that for the Cowboys as well. For example, the Cowboys. I would never have got myself into a situation where I was paying Micah Parsons as much money as the Cowboys paid him. Now, you would say, Zinni, are you nuts? And I would say, no, you want to know why? Don't tell me he's got a great statistic at scaring the quarterback. That's what a quarterback pressure is. Well, you scare him. Okay, that's a pressure. I want sacks. All right? I love the late Rams defensive end, Deacon Jones' definition of what a sack is. It's like pillaging a whole city, destroying the city. Sack, right? I want sacks. And even today, defensive ends that pile up sacks are more valuable than defensive ends or defensive tackles that pile up pressures, scaring the quarterback. What would you say? I say, boo. Give me a break. All right? That's why Trey Jones was right to let Micah Parsons go. I made a video about it. I said it then. I still back it. And what happened? Did they get their Super Bowl? Nope. And even if Micah Parsons remained healthy, with the Packers would not have reached the Super Bowl. Okay. Period. Great players, like, for example, Cleveland Browns have Myles Garrett. That's the guy you pay. You don't give him up. You build around him. The Browns era was not realizing they had their quarterback in Jameis Winston and building a ball control passing offense around him. Instead, they asked him to throw deep, to show that arm, as opposed to being a heel general. And that's why the Browns didn't get the best out of him. There's something about Jameis where some people get what I call Jameis Winston derangement syndrome. And they feel like, oh, he's this guy with a big arm and all he likes to do is throw and everything. It's not him. It's the coaches asking him to do that. But if you take a look at what he did in high school or at Florida State, he ran a balanced ball control passing offense. And he was virtuoso at it. So why not just replicate that in the NFL? Dumb stuff. Okay? Dumb stuff. A team that recognizes Jameis' talent will go to the Super Bowl. Mark my words. Or at least the playoffs and the AFC Championship. But they will be competitive. All right? The Giants have, put them in trick play, whatever. Jameis does everything well because Jameis wants to do well and be liked. It's one thing I understand about him. So, I think Jameis Winston would be a great Raider. Still do think that they should give him a chance at some point. Even if Fernando is there, he'd be a great backup. Of course, the Giants have him. He is in the second part of a 2-year contract. But hey, look, it doesn't matter. Could always make a trade with somebody anytime anyway. Right? All right, back to the main point before I close out. The Raiders are in a prove-it place. New coach coming in at a time when Ben Johnson and Mike Vrabel took their teams to the playoffs. And well, we cannot forget, even though he did falter in the playoffs, we cannot forget Jacksonville Jaguars head coach Liam Cohen. All right? 3 coaches that took their teams deep in the NFL playoffs, and one that took their team to the Super Bowl and performed well for a time, but ultimately they lost. But they got there. They got there. My point is, that makes Clint Kubiak's job that much tougher. That much tougher. Okay? Bringing in Kirk Cousins as a backup, I think is a good idea. They're trying to. Now, if they don't sign him, they really, I think, need to go for James. That's just me. I think Brady James is a great person for a young player like Jackson Dart or Fernando Mendoza to be teamed with. They're all men of Christ. All respect. All right. So there it is. Okay? Let's see what the Raiders do in the run-up to the 2026 NFL Draft. Subscribe to Zinni62 right here and bookmark NFL News by Zinni62.com and check out our new site, NFLDraftPlayerRankings.com. That's right, I said it. NFL Draft Player Rankings. NFL Draft PlayerRankings.com. You say, Zinni, another new site? And I would say, yeah, and here's what it looks like. NFL Draft PlayerRankings.com. Right there. I should say right here. Okay? There it is. 2026 NFL Scouting Combine Players and Performance. Got to update that March 1st. And scroll down, and the way it's designed ultimately is that it will add videos automatically that have NFL draft player rankings in the title. That's the idea. Okay. So it's up, not quite where I want it, but I'm going to adjust that by the end of the week, if not before. All right. Thank you all very much. Remember, once a Raider, always a Raider. Thank you.